Perfect. Thank you all so much for being here today. We are so thrilled to have you, and especially thrilled to have our phenomenal panelists share their years of expertise, their wisdom, their insights, their experiences, diversifying executive teams and boards. So once again, you are at it starts at the top panel, why having a diverse executive team is necessary for building inclusive and equitable workplaces. I am your facilitator and co-host, Dr. Victoria Mattingly, CEO and founder of Mattingly Solutions. And I'm thrilled to be joined by our partner, Baumiller Patel Consulting, to put on this event for you all today. The research is clear. Diverse teams and workplaces have better outcomes when it comes to innovation, engagement, and bottom line ROI. And this is especially crucial when it comes to the diversity of executive teams and boards. But how exactly do we secure and retain a more diverse executive team? This diverse panel with over 60 years of experience in HR, talent acquisition, recruiting, and diversity, equity, and inclusion are going to share best practices about how you and your organization can take action to result in more diversity at senior level leadership. As I mentioned, I'm Dr. Victoria Mattingly, CEO and founder of Mattingly Solutions. We're a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm that helps our clients measure and develop inclusive behaviors, as well as take a data-driven approach developing and executing their diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI strategy. I'm so thrilled to be joined by Ronald Baumiller and Niraj Patel from Baumiller Patel Consulting, a nationally retained boutique executive search firm with a strong track record of placing chief diversity officers at top institutions over the past 10 years. Our two firms have recently combined forces to offer more robust services at that intersection of executive search and DEI. Sophie, our beloved intern, is going to be sharing some links in the chat to learn more about our partnership if you're interested. And today's panel is a direct outcome of our firms working together. Essentially, this is our launch. This is our premiere of our partnership. And it's an honor to share this content with you all today. Ron Baumiller and Niraj Patel are both principals and founders of Baumiller and Patel Consulting. And we're thrilled to be working with them to provide a 1-2 punch to organizations looking to hire a chief diversity officer or someone in a similar diversity, equity, inclusion leadership role. Baumiller Patel will find and place these amazing candidate in this role, and then Mattingly Solutions will come in and set up that person for success by working in partnership with them in the form of DEI expert advisory, coaching, and consulting. But that's enough about us. Let's get to our panel. So without further ado, I wanted to throw it over to Ron and Niraj to introduce today's panelists.
Yeah, and on behalf of not only just Niraj and I, but the entire Baumiller Patel consulting group, we're super thrilled to be here, and I'm just honored to be able to begin introducing our lovely panelists. Let's start with Dr. Darlene Motley. Darlene is the founding dean of the School of Arts, Science, and Business at Chatham University here in my hometown of Pittsburgh. She co-chairs the Diversity and Inclusion Council at Chatham, which embraces the full breadth of the dimensions of diversity and inclusion across all the usual suspects, and not just to name a few: gender, race, orientation, age, disability, ability, you name it. They're incredibly inclusive in where they view themselves and whom they serve. In 2016, she co-founded AADF, the African American Directors Forum. This organization, it seeks to increase African American representation in the boardroom, in the C-suite, across Pittsburgh's publicly traded companies. Prior to joining Chatham, she served as the associate dean at Robert Morris University. Holds a PhD, and that's where she also did her undergrad, but her PhD is in organizational behavioral studies at the University of Pittsburgh, and went to one of my favorites. Her MBA is from the Booth School at the University of Chicago.
Thank you, Ron. And Niraj, if you want to introduce our next panelist, Cheryl Kleppner.
Yeah, Cheryl Kleppner's career spans over 20 years with roles in global talent acquisition and diversity and inclusion leadership roles within the life sciences, pharmaceuticals, and consumer electronic industries. Most recently, she served as the global talent acquisition leader for diversity and inclusion at Thermo Fisher Scientific up in Waltham, Mass. Her career concentrations include talent engagement, inclusion and belonging strategies, building enterprise-wide programming and practices and systems to promote equity and the removal of potential disparities and barriers, administrating affirmative action plans and compliance activities, and creating a more diverse inclusion and belonging employment brands with messaging and content for social media channels and various other campaigns.
Thank you so much, Niraj. And back to Ron, if you would mind introducing Mark Fogel.
Yes, Mark is co-founder and chief people officer for Human Capital 3.0 with over 10 years of CHRO experience at companies such as Leviton, the Markham Group, and the Success Academy Charter Schools. While working at Limited Brands prior to, you might know them, their flagship brands include Bath and Body Works and Victoria's Secret. Mark pioneered and stood up their first DEI initiative. He has been nationally honored by the Society for Human Resource Management as Human Capital Leader of the Year. Also by HR Executive Magazine, he's an honor roll recipient and has been awarded Best HR Ideas in 2012, as well as, but not least, he's been named one of Long Island's 50 most influential business leaders by Long Island Business News.
Thank you, Ron. And for our fourth and final panelist, if you don't mind introducing Devin. Niraj.
Of course, Devin Perry. She's an executive recruiter within the people science team at Remesh. She partners with teams across the company on inclusive hiring practices and the candidate experience. Previously, when she was at Leafweight, Devin sat on the HR and CFO practice, conducting retained searches up to and including the executive level. Also, as part of the Inclusion Council at Leafweight, Devin worked on identifying gaps in the organization and helped create a company-wide diversity and inclusion action plan that minimized and eliminated various gaps. This plan was made with an eye towards inclusive partnerships for sourcing both internal and external candidates, rolling out unconscious bias, training, and creating a roadmap to ensure representation at every level of the company. I think that includes all of our panelists. Victoria, I'll give it back to you. If anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll answer them towards the end during the Q&A period. Victoria?
Thank you, Niraj and Ron, and thank you so much, panelists, for joining us today. So we're just how this is gonna work. We have a few questions that just to kind of keep the structure and make sure that we get all of those talking points out, the first part of the panel today, and then the remaining of the panel, we're gonna answer questions from you. So as you think of questions, if things come to mind, just stick those in the chat. We'll be monitoring those and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end. So to get started, our first question for the panel is, what unique solutions have you used to overcome challenges to hiring executives and board members from underrepresented groups? And let's get started with Devin.
Hi, so I actually have three. One solution would really go out of industry. So I used to recruit for financial services, and usually we don't see women of color prevalent in those executive or board seats. So by going out of industry, you've opened up your candidate pool. The trick really is to find a candidate with that transferable skill set to be able to match what that executive or board level seat needs. A second solution is to give a rising star a chance. This could be junior level talent within the organization, or junior level talent in a flat organization that doesn't really have the chance to grow. Too many times we see organizations not give emerging talent a step up, and that's really a part of an inclusive strategy. And third but final, we used inclusive partnerships in my last role. So under this strategy, we engaged with several diverse organizations such as Girls Who Code or the Women's Foundation. And from there, we networked, found some maybe potential board members. But with these types of, I would say, higher level executive hires, it takes a lot of conversation and wooing, but the partnerships are a great place to find those people because you already know their heart's in the right place, and it is a direct community of the underrepresented that you need.
Thank you so
Victoria?
much for that, Devin. And Cheryl, I noticed that you took your mic off mute. And so if you wanted to go next, and then I wanted to get to Darlene after you. And then Mark, of course, if you have anything to contribute to this question as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll try to keep myself brief. First of all, Devin, 100% agree with absolutely everything you said. The first one, if you're fishing continually in the same pools, you are missing excellent talent that is out there across industry, across experience levels, and across networks. You should proactively always be pipelining and always be networking for people that don't necessarily look like you. And what I mean by that is not ethnicity and race. I mean industry. I mean experience levels. I mean education levels. All of these things can differ. And if you're not open and flexible, you're missing a lot of the pool. The other one is being proactive constantly with your internal talent. You need to grow this talent. They don't just appear that, talent needs groomed, needs sponsorship, needs mentorship. And you need to think before you need someone versus only thinking about where you're going to go when you need someone. So be progressive and think ahead.
Thank you for that, Cheryl. And I love how Devin and Cheryl talking about more in the corporate context and what to do internally. But I know Darlene with the AADF, the African American Directors Forum, is another unique and innovative way of getting more diversity in these executive boards. So Darlene, would you mind sharing about the work you do with AADF as an innovative solution for diversifying executive teams?
Absolutely. And I totally agree with what Devin and Cheryl have already said, and that's probably that underpinning for everything. Is part of it is thinking out of the box, thinking differently. And with the efforts we've made to get executives on publicly traded boards, one of the things that ties more specifically to that is trying to have people think of a different pattern recognition. So as already mentioned, where you're looking for the talent and focusing on the skills, the knowledge, the critical thinking, the strategy that an individual brings, as opposed to they need to be a CEO or a CFO if you're going to get placed on the board of a publicly traded company. So having people focus on what an individual brings. And then what was already said, I think Cheryl specified some areas, looking for talent in different places. So understanding some, what we might say code words, that thing about implicit bias, we all have them, and recognizing that it's not just around dimensions of diversity. We can have them in all kinds of ways. My background, undergrad is engineering. So there was a time where we would kind of look a little differently at the liberal arts majors, right? So that bias can come out in many different ways. So we've really tried to help people focus on what that can be and how that can play into your actual hiring, that it literally starts with the resume that comes across the desk. And that we know that for board positions, those are very often built around relationships. So how did you get out of your circle in terms of with whom do you socialize and relate so that you can get access to that broader group of diverse candidates that can be out there? And then tied to that, that idea of where are we looking, tying to the different organizations that were already brought up. But if you're trying to do this earlier in your pipeline, what are your relationship with other minority organizations, with historically Black colleges and universities? So really trying to broaden that whole pipeline and having people think about the implicit bias that we have, and then the expectations we have when we're looking for those positions, that we broaden that.
I love that, challenging those expectations and calling out that we all have biases. I feel like people try to get out of that thinking, oh, I'm not biased, that doesn't mean, but we're humans. This is how our brains work. And so recognizing that and trying to build in strategies to overcome and challenge those, I think that's such a great call out. And Mark, anything else to add when it comes to unique solutions to overcoming challenges to hiring more diverse executive leaders and board members?
I'll share two. I'll share one that will be in a moment that's somewhat of a repeat of what we've heard. I'll share one that was a little bit different. And I've worked for organizations that I call at the opposite extremes of the bell curve. I worked for very white male dominated leadership groups at two of my organizations heading HR. And I worked for very extreme to the other side of the spectrum organization in the nonprofit education world. And I believe that there's a world where it all gets mixed up like a salad bowl. But earlier in my career, when we were dealing with old white dudes like myself, I had to get into the practice of having my talent folks strip names off resumes. They'd send, what they do is they'd send a resume without the name of the candidate, and sometimes even strip where they went to college over to the hiring manager, because the bias starts at the very first look of the resume. So forget about your ATSs. The bias starts with your hiring manager. So what can you do to paradigm shift that? And that was really early in my career, a key learning to the fact that we are all biased. Now, the second initiative that I had later in my career in HR was really expanding our college recruiting from, we think of college recruiting as we're located in a certain area and we're going to recruit at schools in a certain area. Well, college students go to colleges all over the country. So if you want to expand your diversity and your pool, it's really could be something as simple as get on a plane and go somewhere. You know, I heard Darlene mention where are the fish, right? Go fishing where those individuals are. Go fishing where you can broaden your inclusiveness, where you can broaden your candidate pool. So two foods for thought. Last one I'll mention is that there tends to be a focus on KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. That's what we see on resumes. Sometimes you have to shift gears and go to competencies and think about behaviors. So, and how do you do that? And it's not as easy as it sounds, but using a little bit of behavior-oriented recruiting and competency-based questioning can help you in finding that person that, you know, that hidden treasure that may not, you know, at first look on their resume be the right person, or the traditional person that keeps you in that loop, that gets you stuck and not broadening your horizons.
Thank you for that, Mark. And I think a point that just needs to be made, and what you were getting at, I think with all the panelists' contributions thus far, the excuse of there just isn't diverse talent available it no longer flies. That's no longer an appropriate excuse. It's unacceptable. You know, all we need to do is just look at the demographic breakdown of us as a society, as a country right now. You know, one example I love to use is women are obtaining more higher level degrees than men are right now. We have this untapped, this lowly, like poorly tapped talent pool when it comes to the gender conversation. The same goes for all these other areas of diversity as well. So finding new places to fish, challenging biases, working on that pipeline, seeing that internal talent, all great strategies. Thank you for those so far, panelists. The next question, kind of getting at the same, like, how do we move past these cop-outs of there aren't enough, you know, diversity in the talent, or another cop-out, this stuff just takes time. We just need more time. And that is true, right? This is a long game. It's a long-term strategy, but there are some instances where we can speed up some of the rate of progress that we are seeing, especially historically. So what strategies have you used to speed up the progress toward diversifying executive teams and boards? And if you want to start, Darlene.
Absolutely. As we shared, we started the African American Directors Forum really to address that need here in Pittsburgh. We had done the research, the percentage of our top companies that had African Americans in the C-suite and on the board was pretty low. We're making progress and we're really pleased with what's happening. But we kind of took that, how they say, the bull by the horns, to say we need to get the leaders of our companies, the CEO, the non-gov chair, the board chair, in the room with qualified African-American executives. And what we did with that was include many who are what we call board proven. They're already on publicly traded boards, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 boards, but also brought in, primarily in the Pittsburgh area, what we call board ready. So executives within the various companies that we have, but internally hadn't really been considered, but also then just allowing that interaction to occur so that the people who can make the decisions are actually meeting people, seeing the quality. So getting to your point, Victoria, there aren't enough, and allowing people to have quality time together to learn about what these people are doing, what kind of experiences, so both KSAs and competencies, and learning and seeing that. We started that in Pittsburgh. We've actually been invited to do that in several other cities now with very positive results where people are being placed on boards and doing very well. The other part is helping to prepare African Americans not only to be on the board, to be in the C-suite, but to make sure they have the training and what would I say, interactions to not only be in those roles, but to take on significant roles. So thinking about, do you want to be the non-gov chair? Do you want to be a lead director? Those kinds of things, and helping provide those resources. So that, I would say that's probably been the biggest, the most satisfying. That's a very direct opportunity because you're literally putting people face to face. And I think building on that is getting companies to recognize, and we've said it already in some ways, but you need to start that D&I training and effort, whether you have a diverse team or not. Start it now, because the reality is it does take some time. And if you have people who are in the lower ranks, what are you doing to actually prepare them to be in the suite and on a board? And a shameless plug probably for all of us is that we really recommend, if you're doing this and you're new at it, reach out to your colleagues who have been doing it, like so many people that we're hearing. You don't have to start from scratch and try to do it all on your own. There are a lot of resources out there. Make sure the company is taking advantage of that. You who are in the field, take advantage of that. We have so many of us who do that. And I'd like to have us think about it the same way companies have done other initiatives. So whether that's around quality control, sustainability now, safety, look for the experts to help you develop those programs.
Oh, I love that so much. And to not lean too hard on our fish analogy, but I feel like what you have done with the AADF is is almost, you built a whole new pond, right? It's one thing to find a new place to fish, just another thing to create a whole new lake to pull fish from. And so I love that. What an innovative strategy just to speed up the progress to diversifying these boards. Thank you not only for sharing that, Darlene, but for the work that you and David do with the AADF. I did notice that Cheryl took her mic off. Cheryl, what do you have to contribute to this question?
You probably saw my head shaking the entire time Darlene was talking. I just couldn't stop myself. And I kept wanting to write down points so I could address them. I know I'm not going to hit them all, but I'm 100% in concert with you, Darlene. And so this is a plug apps actually for the AADF because I also have attended. I know my intro was that I was in Waltham, but no, I'm right here in Pittsburgh. So that is an organization that myself and my prior company became a part of, attended, and it goes back to the whole networking, education, communication, fishing in different ponds. Get your companies, get your leadership who has to be accountable for decisions into organizations such as AADF. I also see Evan Fraser on this call. Evan, I'm going to call you out for the great work that you and your organization does. So another way to just get people to start the discussion. People won't address what they're not thinking about or what they're not aware of. Especially if they're undereducated. So the other part of this plug is for groups that do have DEI or DEI and B, whatever you want to call people, experts that you can lean on. So those are two big points. But the other one is this is leadership accountability. And not only leadership accountability, but that's where it starts for the name of the call today. You have to have the investment of your senior leaders, and they have to model the appropriate behavior and be willing to Darlene's earlier point, instill diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity in every aspect of the company. This is not an HR initiative. This is not a leadership initiative. This should be your supply chain initiative. This should be your ERG initiatives. This is just like any other business imperative. So that's the point I think that we need to drive home. This is not a current topic of the day. This isn't going away. This is something incredibly long overdue. We need to be thinking about it as business imperative on top of what some people say is just the right thing to do. This is an urgent need. This will build our future. But last final point, back to the excuse that we just can't find the right talent. COVID's taken that away. Everybody's working remotely. There is no reason why now you can't recruit people from anywhere across the country or around the world and not have to pay for their relocation, by the way. So that excuse absolutely goes away.
I love that. I love that. And now I was working with a potential client. They asked, what recommendations do you have? It was a tiny little town in Kansas. And I'm allowed to say this because my husband's from there, but they're like, no one wants to move to this tiny town in Kansas. I'm like, stop making them move there. Watch how your pool explodes when you take away these unrealistic expectations of having people upend their life when it's a largely white collar role that you can do remotely. And we're all proving that right now. But Mark, I saw you took your mic off. What else do you have to add to the conversation?
I want to throw a different wrench into the conversation, which has to do with culture. And one of the things that we sometimes overlook is what is your current culture and how is that impacting this discussion? And that's not an easy move because culture sometimes starts with leadership, but it also involves every member of your organization that are contributing to it. And it's not an easy fix. It's something that you have to say, how is our culture impacting what we're doing and how this is hitting diversity? And I don't have an easy answer. Like, it would be great if I could come online and say, just do this and you'll fix your problem. You won't. But I think the first step is identifying if not only your leadership is an issue, but is your culture an issue? Don't forget about that. It's very important.
Yeah, it's such a great call out. And, when this field started, 30, 35 years ago, it started largely as diversity, right? And then we added the inclusion later and we realized, okay, diversity is an important part of it. It's we have all these research-based outcomes when we have a more diverse organization, but we're going to not capitalize on that strength of diversity if we don't have the culture to set up different groups for success, people from underrepresented groups for success, people who historically marginalized groups for success. And that comes with culture. And we need both at the same time. And you need the diverse hiring practices, but also the culture work to make sure that people can be their best selves in that organization, that we're maximizing talent and potential and making people feel valued, respected, seen, and heard in the context of that organization. So such a great call out. Devin, before we ask the next question, anything to add to this line of conversation?
I'm going to save it for the next question.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So next question. How have you set up new executive level hires for success when they're the first or the only? And just like a double click on this, how does one avoid tokenism in doing this work? And so for those of you who might not know, tokenism is whenever we're bringing in someone to be that only, right? We need a woman on the board. We need a person of color on our team. And that's the only thing that they're valued for. And that's wrong and bad. And we don't want to get into tokenism, but at the end of the day, there are the first, sometimes there is the first woman on the board. There is the first woman of color on the board. So how do you manage this concept of being the first or the only? And go ahead, Mark.
So I'm going to take it from a reverse position, because everyone always thinks, okay, we're talking about you're adding your first female or your first minority member to your board. Sometimes it could be the reverse. It could be, I'm the first over 50 person working at a very young organization, right? And so you have to first get out of the trap of what is that person to the board or what is that person to the organization. Once you get beyond that, regardless of where they fit, is that person, you have to make sure you have somebody who's strong-willed that you've put into that first role, because it's about building it's about building momentum. That first person's success is going to lead to bringing on the second person and the third person and breaking down barriers. But if that first person doesn't have a little bit of rigor and a little bit of, I hate to use the word toughness, but I can't think of another word that fits that. They have to be able to withstand. I always think of when I watch the movie about Jackie Robinson as a baseball player entering baseball and what he went through. And the Dodgers picked him because he had fortitude to be the first to break the barrier. And I think that we need to set up an individual for success when we do. And for those who I work in HR as an HR leader, it's important that we make sure that we provide support to that individual as they're breaking down the barrier. So food for thought.
Real quick follow-up to that, Mark. What would be some examples of what that support could look like?
I think that there needs to be some direct and I want to say harsh conversation, but things get said subtly in meetings that about an individual or a situation, so let's use the over 50 analogy, just because I brought it up. Well, we need some innovative, some fresh thinking, but the terminology starts young and different and creative, and we associate young and different and creative with a younger person, right? That could be an example of saying, hey, wait a second, everyone, be aware of the language that you're using. You have to be willing to call people out on what they're saying, which is a very difficult thing to do. Most people don't have the fortitude to say to their CFO, what you said was inappropriate, or let's dial that back in the moment. Or even if you can't do it in the moment, pull them aside and say, listen, you got to dial that back. You can't be having conversations like that. And I see Darlene nodding her head, and I'm sure she's got some comments that she'd like to add to that.
Well, thank you, Mark. I think you said that really well, right? Because that's an example where it goes beyond race and gender, but coming back to those kinds of things whenever there's something happens. I think we're in this culture now that there is more, let's call it out. So the other part of that is the whole onboarding process, right? trying to get people ready for what they might face, but also the training that has to go on, that when those comments are made, as you said, whether it's in the moment, I feel like if it's severe, it needs to be in the moment. You can't let it ride, right? But then there also is the behind the scenes work where we're continuing to work with the leadership team to say, hey, when these things happen, we have to be providing more training that's very specific and intentional. So the other thing I like to think about Pittsburgh, I'm not a Pittsburgh, my husband David, who's on here, is. So I've been here long enough. Pittsburgh is made up of all these wonderful neighborhoods, and they have very unique characteristics and things like that. But they also are about heritage and history and all these things. We have to be intentional when we're bringing somebody in to provide information and resources for people to make decisions on where they want to live, and basic things that, you know, some of the ladies will appreciate: hair salons, or a guy, what barbershop do I need to go to? Actually putting together those things that can help make a transition both within the organization but externally for a person, because we get a lot of times when people, the job can be pretty phenomenal, but they're just not comfortable with Pittsburgh and what that means to be in Pittsburgh. So I think that is part of what we need to be very intentional in terms of how we prepare people for what they're going to experience coming to Pittsburgh, or if they're here, as you mentioned already, in the boardroom, those incidences and things that can happen no matter where they are. And as you mentioned, am I really going to call out my CFO or CEO or even my just one step up boss, right? But if the person isn't, can we help develop what we're hearing so much about now, allies and accomplices who will do it for the person? So whether it's, oh, we're making the 50-year-old or 60-year-old feel out of place because there's this whole group of young people, or whether it's a person of color or the woman being the first on the board. And I think everybody here knows the data that says to go from tokenism, you really need 3 or more, not even 2, but two is helpful, right? And then having it in the minds of those who are around that room that, yes, we need to not just think about this one person we've hired, but what are we going to do to get to a tipping point so that that token in the room is not just subjected to subliminal things, but they're also not expected to represent whatever that category is, right? Whether it's race or gender or age, that, okay, you represent everybody in that category.
Which that is such an undue and an inappropriate burden to put on someone when they're already the only. And then now we want you to be the voice of every other person like you in our organization or in the world. You know, it feels like, oh, I'm gonna lean on you because you have this perspective and this experience, but acknowledging this is still an individual human with their own unique perspective and experience. Just because they belong to a certain group does not mean they represent that group, and they should not have that burden. And another great point that you made, Darlene, is recognizing the whole experience, the human experience of starting a new role, relocating to a new city. It's one thing to get the onboarding right internally, but how can we onboard this person externally and set them up for success and let them know the places to go and the good neighborhoods. And if they have kids, you know, the school districts, and, you know, really thinking about the whole human and taking that intersectional lens, recognizing we have multiple identities that we are bringing to our role, to our work, to us as humans. I just love all those points. And Devin, I wanted to jump to you next. I noticed you had your mic, and then we'll get to Cheryl after that.
So I think another way to set somebody up for success, especially when they're acutely aware that they are the only or first one, is to let them know what the inclusive plan is, the 3, the 6, the 9-month plan with actionable insights, not just say, we'd like to have senior level hires. How are you going about doing that? So just keeping them abreast of what's actually going on in that inclusive plan gets them their buy-in as well. And that's how you engage them and retain them. And when it comes to avoiding tokenism, that is an organizational wide issue. That does not stay with the person. So I also find that tokenism is an attitude that is sometimes taken on by the organization or maybe even some members of the organization. So you, not as the individual taking this on, but as an ally, have to call out that tokenism when it's happening. And again, being first in an organization and tokenism are two totally different things. So letting that person know that they're not going to be the only person that is different in the long run, I think is helpful, and having a true inclusive plan behind that, because inclusivity and diversity doesn't just happen with hiring, it happens with the organization overall. So thinking about that plan, sharing it with people, and being open about it to the public, because that attracts diversity as well. So thinking about that plan, what that looks like, and really sharing it to the world in an authentic way that is actionable and true, because there's so many organizations that say nice things about diversity, but you don't see it on the board. You don't see it at the executive level. You don't understand how they're recruiting, and they seem pretty homogenous when you look at the organization overall.
Oh, such great points there. And I would be amiss if I didn't amplify. Both Devin and Darlene mentioned the role of allies and allyship in this work, and recognizing when it's time to start, we're going all in on DE&I, we're going all in on diversifying our executive leaders, getting those allies, the training they need, the support they need, the words they need. I put a resource in the chat about bystander intervention, going back to the point before of calling out things as we see them. But how can we find the people who are already champions, already on board, have that mindset, have that resilience that Mark was talking about before, and give them the tools to help them be the allies and the stewards of this effort to set up this shift, this culture shift, and these new faces, these new people who are going to take the organization to an even better level, set them up for success and leveraging allyship. But I did want to get to Cheryl and hear her comments as well.
And again, we're all so similarly on the same page and show the same passion around these things. So again, I'll try to be brief. I absolutely agree with Mark with the transparency to the candidate or to whomever is coming in the door. But I also think there's a prep piece ahead of any hire. It goes back to that ongoing culture of inclusion and diversity. That this is the way that we operate. This isn't a one-off. This is not how we're going to act just with this hire or with this transfer or with this promotion. This is ingrained in us. This is the way we work. I think there's nothing wrong with some preparatory training, whether that be unconscious bias or what have you, with the hiring team, especially if you're talking the executive team or the executive board. Let's talk about this. Let's create a safe space. Let's recognize that we all have these issues. And then the other piece you already hit on, Victoria, which is intersectionality. You know, we all, I think it's very easy to assume that if I am coming into a board, I am a female, that I might have different insight to the female, imperative. But what about all of the other things that I am? I actually might be much more aligned with a different group or with my, white male peers. You just don't know, and it's all okay. But that culture of inclusion and where it's okay to speak up and to discuss, and the prep work before someone comes in the door, to me, is just as important as once someone gets there. The last thing I'll say is my leaky bucket philosophy. If you don't have that culture of inclusion and belonging, we can recruit all day, we can network all day, we can go to these big events, we can join networking opportunities, but someone walks in the door and doesn't see the transparent and realistic culture, and it doesn't match what you said it was, you're losing your candidates and you're hurting your brand and your reputation. So think about the ongoing work, not just the one quick hit.
Oh, such great points there, Cheryl. Thank you for all that, panelists. And at this time, we have about 10, 15 minutes left for questions. So I haven't seen any questions in the chat. That's totally fine. Feel free to take yourself off of mute if you have some questions for our panelists here today. Oh, and I do see a question in chat. This is from Shannon. Thank you, Shannon. There's now literally hundreds of millions of dollars supposedly earmarked for diversity in business in Pittsburgh. Things like foundations, incubators, new venture capitalist firms, government. But I've literally not been able to find one new job or opportunity based on these initiatives. Can someone speak to professional opportunities that are coming out of these initiatives and how to plug in as both members of underrepresented groups and white males such as myself that are interested in promoting change in Pittsburgh and beyond? Thank you for that question. Go ahead, Sharon.
I'll start. I think this is just one example, not necessarily at the executive level, but organizations that I have been a part of and very recently did earmark dollars for hiring initiatives and started reaching out and networking with groups that maybe they had not in the past to diversify the pool. So being parts of also for yourself of some of those organizations could help you understand the hiring initiatives. I don't know that many companies are outright saying in their job postings or how they're going about recruiting that this is part of this initiative. Some are. And so I think a clear way to see who's doing this openly is going on to someone's website, the company that you have interest in or that you work for potentially, seeing what they're advertising in the diversity and inclusion components or just in their news, seeing how they're doing their outreach and being a part of those groups.
Thank you for that, Cheryl. And Ron, I saw you went off mute. Did you have something to add to that question as well?
Yeah, no, my big thing is merely whenever you think about trying to break in, and especially whenever you're approaching a new group as a candidate, something that everyone's been dancing around is a lot of, even at the executive level, all the way trickling down to more entry level, is the biggest thing that one has to determine, or whenever you're in the talent acquisition space, is that you need to be able to wrap your hands around exactly what the buy-in is from the leaders. It's kind of what we were hinting at with the tokenism and those sorts of things. And there's a lot of rhetoric around boardrooms around this sorts of thing. And I've run into it time and time again where everyone seems on board. But me being the lone ally and the lone advocate for these programs, it's always still a challenge, and there's no playbook to getting the full buy-in, even everyone says. So I think it's a lot of just keeping persistent and doing your due diligence to make sure that you find yourself in a successful position, so that when you get in there, you have the resources to meet not only your potential, but strive to do better, right? And be the person that we've all been talking about throughout the course of this hour. But yeah, that was my 2 cents.
Go ahead, Darlene.
I would just add, this is probably a shout out to Evan as well, with the efforts that started with Tally and now with his new organization, where they're really trying to work with companies to make sure companies are looking at the people they have, so that at every level there's that intentionality of, okay, we see who we have, we're looking at what kind of training development that folks need and making sure they're getting that to continue. From the point of view of if you're looking at your own organization, find out, are they connected to some of these kinds of things? To Mark's point about, is this real? Is it I truly am trying to embrace this at the top of the company, so that you know that you have that support. The work with AADF, we've largely focused on C-suite and boardrooms. So it's a much higher level bar, in the sense of you're not likely to just kind of walk into that, right? But we have folks at all different levels that could want to move or come in from other areas. And I think it gets back to a point Devin made earlier, but Cheryl as well, is that you constantly need to be out there looking for the talent. And so frankly, I think over time, people start to know what companies are really embracing this, who's serious about it. So if I'm thinking about moving, I can look at what they've already done, what have they been doing. So it's going to be really incumbent on companies to show that they're out there constantly looking at what are you providing for your folks, right? So as if you have that kind of revolving door where people come in and they leave, that reputation gets known. And if you are truly trying to embrace this change, that starts to happen. So I would encourage, that came from Kelsey, try to find out what companies are doing. We're out here, there are a number of us out here trying to share and show who's doing what. So try connecting with that.
And Shannon, to piggyback Darlene, what I meant by due diligence, exactly what she said. Ask people that have worked there. Look at how long the people stay there that are at your level in your career. Don't be afraid to ping somebody on LinkedIn and just say, what was your experience? Did you feel accepted? Were you held at the same level as your peers? But yeah, no, that's all I meant. But right on. I'm right there with you, Darlene.
I love that. I want to get to Mark. Before we do that, Mark, I did want to call out, we do have the honor of having Evan Frazier on the call today. Darlene, you just mentioned the work that he does with the Advanced Leadership Initiative, or TALLY. Evan, would you mind just sharing a little bit about that, especially in response to Shannon's question about, resources in Pittsburgh to do this work?
Sure. Thank you so much, Victoria. And thank you, Darlene, for your great explanation. Really appreciate that. Great discussion today and panel and the questions. The Advanced Leadership Initiative is really targeted or really committed to helping to advance African-American executive leadership. And we do it in a variety of ways, but one of our signature programs that we have is called the Executive Leadership Academy. And we partner with Carnegie Mellon and their Tepper School of Business to really have companies and employers invest in their senior level talent, either executives or mid-level managers that have higher level aspirations. And so it's one way to, have companies be able to really invest in their own talent, and even at times even help to identify talent that can help their organization grow. There were a number of things that were said today. Everything that was said is right on target. I did want to just kind of highlight this idea of intentionality. Darlene, you just recently mentioned that and how important that is. And as companies, start to look at building, and all the speakers here really touched upon it, it's this idea that, it's not a one and done type of thing. It's not transactional. In order to really, build a culture and to a long stand, you have to really create connections, long-term connections, so that you could build upon those connections and really start to build a pipeline of resources that will allow you to identify candidates, also to be able to invest in your own potential or your talent that has greater potential. I think that's really, really critical. To the question that was just asked also, I did want to just let you know that one of the things we also recognize, even though our Executive Leadership Academy is at the executive and mid-level manager level, we're putting in place later this year an Emerging Leaders Program. And so I think that will help to open up some more doors for those who aren't quite at the senior or mid-level manager level. And our hope is that that will also help to continue to reinforce this continuous pipeline of great talent that does exist, and it is out there, and that's important for people to know. Last thing I'll just share is we were talking a little bit earlier, this idea of how do you counter tokenism within organizations, and I just wanted to add and just chime in one little message there. What was said is this importance of resiliency, and that is important in being intentional there. The other thing I'll just share is that I think it also requires a stronger level of sponsorship And so if you have someone who's coming into your organization, you know, they're, you know, just by themselves or one of very few individuals who are at that level, they're going to be spotlighted, right? They're going to be just higher level of visibility, which means that the spotlight is on them. Any mistake they made, might make is going to have an even greater sense of awareness, we'll say. And so I think that's why it's so important to have a stronger, more deliberate level of sponsorship, so that those individuals have the support that they need as they are entering an organization and have the opportunity to grow. Because anyone to grow has to have the opportunity to, make mistakes and to fail and to learn from those mistakes and grow, move on. But very often with diverse populations, people of color, I know certainly African Americans, what happens often is they're not afforded that level of ability to learn from mistakes, and they're just automatically, they're dismissed or discounted. And so it's important to have the level of sponsorship that allows that ability for that individual to learn from those mistakes and to be able to grow within the environment instead of being sidelined. And so just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Thanks so much. This is such a great session. To all the speakers, Devin, Cheryl, Darlene, you guys are amazing.
Thank you, Evan, and Mark, not to forget you as well. If you could bring us home and for our final point, and then we'll wrap up.
I just wanted to answer a question quickly Kelsey had put in. She asked about moving from KSAs or knowledge, skills, abilities to competencies. And I want to just use this analogy that there's the low bar and the high bar. And we talk about compliance and ethics. Compliance is the low bar, ethics is the high bar. Knowledge, skills, and abilities is the low bar. That's the price of entry for any job. You have to have the basic abilities to do a job. You have to have the licensing, the skill set. But when it comes to the other part of it, which is your competencies, I think that it's important for organizations, and we do this with many of our clients, to dig into the behaviors of individuals and how it will fit with culture. Okay. And now that may not be an inclusivity conversation, but it's a reality conversation. And if people don't exhibit the right behaviors, doesn't matter whether you're green or blue or orange, right? You need to be able to exhibit those behaviors. And I do suggest work samples and assessment centers, but only in limited ways. And is it legally defensible? I'm not a labor attorney. I will tell you that if you have done your job with knowledge, skills, and abilities, you never have an issue of defensibility. But, where does it fit into the inclusion conversation? I think it fits in because if you're trying to be truly inclusive, you want to hire people who can exhibit the behaviors, regardless of all of the trappings that are needed for that job. That's the HR guy speaking.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you so much to all of our panelists today. Just to echo what Evan said, this was just such phenomenal content. Please, everyone, do the clap, give some spirit fingers, give our panelists a virtual round of applause. Please connect with them on LinkedIn. Sophie, our lovely intern, is putting all their links in the chat right now. Also, just a reminder, today's panel was sponsored by Mattingly Solutions and Baumiller Patel Consulting. Feel free to reach out to us anytime that we could help you with any executive search or diversity, equity, inclusion needs, especially the intersection of the two. We're just so thrilled to have you all today. Thank you, Darlene, Mark, Cheryl, and Devin, for your phenomenal contributions. And we are only as good as the team beneath us. I wanted to call out on the Mattingly Solutions team, Sophie, Kelsey, and Ryan, and also on Baumiller Patel, we have a Steffi and Kayla, who have been phenomenal helping us build this panel, get it all together, put these beautiful marketing materials together. Feel free to connect with all of us online, give us a call, and thank you once again to our panelists for giving us such amazing strategies for how we can diversify executive teams and boards. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You as well. Please reach out. You have
Thanks.
my email anytime. Thank you, Cheryl.